mansion sat on top of the hill like a crown overlooking the entire city below. Inside its marble halls lived the Hartwell family, one of the richest families in the country. Richard Hartwell owned half the real estate in the state, and his wife Margaret came from old money that went back generations. They had everything anyone could want: cars, jewelry, private jets, and a daughter named Claire. Claire was 7 years old, with golden curls and blue eyes that looked like pieces of sky. She wore designer dresses every day and had a room full of toys that most children only saw in catalogs. But Claire had not spoken a single word since she was 3 years old. The doctors came and went, each one more expensive than the last. They ran tests, did brain scans, and checked her hearing. Everything came back normal. Claire could hear perfectly. She could understand everything people said to her. She just chose not to speak. The psychiatrists called it selective mutism, but they could not tell the Hartwells why it started or how to fix it. Richard threw money at the problem. He hired speech therapists from Switzerland, child psychologists from London, and specialists from Johns Hopkins. They all tried different methods. Some used toys and games. Others tried art therapy or music. Nothing worked. Claire would sit quietly, sometimes nodding or shaking her head, but her lips stayed sealed shut. Margaret stopped hosting her famous dinner parties. She could not stand the pitying looks from other society women or their whispered conversations behind gloved hands. The shame ate at her like rust on iron. She began spending more time at the spa or shopping in Paris, anywhere but home with her silent daughter. The staff at the mansion knew to be quiet around Claire. They had learned that loud noises or sudden movements made her retreat further into herself. She would run to her room and hide under her bed for hours, so they walked softly and spoke in hushed voices, treating the entire house like a library. Every 6 months, the Hartwells hired new help, hoping a fresh face might somehow reach Claire. Nannies came with impressive resumes and left within weeks, frustrated and defeated. None of them could break through the wall Claire had built around herself. On a cold morning in November, a woman named Sarah arrived at the service entrance of the mansion. She was 50 years old, with dark skin and gray streaks running through her black hair. She wore a simple coat that had seen better days and carried a small bag with all her belongings. Sarah had worked as a maid for different families over the years, moving from job to job as positions opened or households dissolved. The head housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, looked at Sarah's worn shoes and faded dress with barely hidden disapproval. The Hartwells usually hired staff who looked more polished, more refined, but they were desperate. 3 maids had quit in the last month alone, and the house needed someone immediately. Mrs. Chen explained the rules in a clipped voice. "Stay quiet around Miss Claire. Do not try to make her talk. Do not ask questions about the family. Clean thoroughly and remain invisible." Sarah nodded at each instruction, her face calm and patient. The pay was good, better than anything Sarah had earned before. She needed this job. Her small apartment rent had gone up, and her sister's medical bills were piling up like snow in winter. So she kept her head down and followed Mrs. Chen through the massive house, memorizing which rooms to clean and which hallways to avoid. Claire first saw Sarah on the 3rd day. The girl was sitting in the library, surrounded by picture books she was not reading. She was staring out the window at the gray November sky, her small hands folded in her lap. Sarah came in to dust the shelves, moving quietly as instructed. Most of the staff avoided looking directly at Claire. They treated her like a piece of furniture, something to work around but not acknowledge. Sarah was different. As she dusted, she hummed softly under her breath. It was an old gospel song her mother used to sing, slow and gentle like a river. Claire's head turned slightly. Her blue eyes followed Sarah as the maid moved along the bookshelves, her humming filling the silent library with something warm. Sarah noticed the girl watching but did not stop or speak. She just continued her work and her song. When she finished dusting, she nodded politely at Claire and left the room. The next day, Claire was in the library again at the same time. And again, Sarah came to clean, humming that same soft melody. This pattern continued for a week. Claire would wait in the library and Sarah would come, hum and clean around her without saying a word. Mrs. Chen noticed and warned Sarah not to disturb Miss Claire. Sarah assured her she was only doing her job. But the truth was, Sarah had seen something in Claire's eyes that the expensive doctors had missed. It was not defiance or stubbornness. It was fear. Sarah knew fear. She had raised 3 children on her own after her husband died in a factory accident. She had scrubbed floors while going to night school. She had survived poverty, racism, and loss. Fear was an old companion, and she recognized it in all its forms. Claire was afraid of something, and whatever it was had stolen her voice. One afternoon, Sarah was cleaning the hallway outside Claire's bedroom when she heard soft crying. She paused, then quietly pushed the door open. Claire was sitting on her bed, tears running down her face, holding a stuffed rabbit that had seen better days. Sarah walked in slowly and sat down on the floor near the bed, not too close. She did not reach for Claire or try to comfort her with words. She just sat there, present and calm. After a few minutes, the crying stopped. Claire looked down at Sarah with red, swollen eyes. Sarah began to hum again, that same gentle song. And then she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. She did not speak to Claire. She spoke to the room, to the air, to herself. She talked about her own daughter, how she used to be afraid of thunderstorms, how she would hide under the kitchen table during summer rains. Sarah told the empty room how she would sit with her daughter until the fear passed, never forcing her to come out, just being there. Claire listened, her tears drying on her cheeks. Sarah did not ask her questions or expect answers. She just shared her stories like gifts, leaving them in the room for Claire to pick up if she wanted. This became their routine. Sarah would clean, hum, and sometimes share quiet stories. Claire would listen, her eyes following Sarah everywhere. Slowly, carefully, something was building between them. Trust, fragile as spun glass, was beginning to form. The other staff noticed that Claire seemed calmer when Sarah was around. Mrs. Chen said nothing, but she watched Sarah carefully, suspicion in her narrow eyes. Margaret Hartwell was too busy with her own life to notice much about the new maid. And Richard was always at the office, building his empire higher and wider. Nobody saw what was really happening. Nobody understood that Sarah was not trying to make Claire speak. She was trying to make Claire feel safe enough to want to speak. There was a difference, a crucial one that all the expensive doctors had missed, and Sarah suspected, in that quiet way that comes from years of watching and listening, that Claire's silence was not just about fear. It was about a secret, something the child had seen or heard that was too big, too heavy for her small shoulders to carry alone. Sarah had learned long ago that secrets have power. They can protect or poison, and the secrets kept in rich houses were often the darkest kind. 3 weeks passed, and winter settled over the mansion like a cold blanket. The trees outside lost their leaves, and frost covered the windows each morning. Sarah continued her quiet work, and Claire continued her silent watching. The household prepared for the annual Christmas gala that Margaret insisted on hosting despite everything. It was a matter of pride and status. Canceling would mean admitting something was wrong, and the Hartwells never admitted weakness. Workers came to hang lights and decorate. Caterers planned menus. Margaret directed everything like a general commanding troops. During this chaos, Sarah noticed things others missed. She saw how Claire would press herself against walls when her father walked by, making herself small. She observed how the girl never ate dinner with her parents, always taking meals alone in her room. She watched how Claire would sit at the top of the stairs sometimes, listening to her parents argue in the rooms below. Sarah also noticed Richard Hartwell more closely. He was a tall man with silver hair and a voice that commanded attention. People jumped when he spoke. His eyes were cold like coins, and they rarely looked at Claire with any warmth. When he did acknowledge his daughter, it was with frustration, as if she was a business deal that had gone wrong. Margaret was different, but no better. She looked at Claire with something worse than anger. She looked at her with disappointment, as if the child had personally embarrassed her by refusing to speak. She would sigh heavily whenever Claire entered a room, a sound that said everything without words. One evening, Sarah was putting away laundry in the hallway when she heard Richard and Margaret arguing in their bedroom. The door was slightly open and their voices carried. Richard was angry about something involving money. A business deal had fallen through. He blamed Margaret for spending too much on doctors for Claire. Margaret shot back that he was never home anyway, so what did it matter? Their words got sharper, crueler. They threw blame like knives, and somewhere in the middle of it all, they mentioned Claire as if she was a problem to solve, not a child to love. Sarah's heart ached. She had suspected the marriage was cold, but hearing it confirmed was different. She understood a little more now why Claire stayed silent. What was the point of speaking when nobody really listened? The next day, Sarah found Claire in her usual spot in the library. But this time the girl was drawing with crayons on large pieces of paper. Sarah came in to clean and glanced at the drawings. They were dark, full of black and gray scribbles. No sun, no flowers, no smiling faces like most children drew. Just darkness. Sarah sat down near Claire, something she had never done during work hours. She could lose her job for this, but something told her it was important. She picked up a crayon, a yellow one, and drew a simple sun on her own piece of paper. Then she drew a little house with a door and windows. She drew stick figures holding hands. Claire watched Sarah's hands move. Slowly, tentatively, she picked up a red crayon and added a flower next to Sarah's house. It was small and crooked, but it was there. A tiny spot of color in all that darkness. Sarah smiled. She did not say anything. She just drew a bird flying in her sky. Claire added another flower. They drew together in silence, a conversation without words, until Mrs. Chen's sharp voice called Sarah back to work. That night, Sarah lay in her small room in the servants' quarters, thinking. She had worked in enough wealthy homes to know their secrets. Money did not buy happiness. It often bought the opposite. It bought privacy to hide cruelty, walls high enough to keep truth out, and lawyers clever enough to make problems disappear. She thought about her own children, grown now with families of their own. They had grown up poor but loved. They had grown up with her voice reading stories at night, her hands braiding hair, her laughter filling their small apartment. They had never known silence like Claire's. Sarah made a decision then. She would reach Claire not for the Hartwells but for the child herself. Every child deserved to be heard, even if that meant first teaching them it was safe to speak. The days grew shorter and colder. The Christmas gala approached like a storm. Margaret grew more stressed, snapping at the staff over tiny details. Richard worked longer hours, coming home late and leaving early. And Claire drifted through the mansion like a ghost, silent and watchful. Sarah began leaving small things for Claire to find. A piece of candy on her pillow, a smooth stone that sparkled in the light, a note with a simple drawing of a smiling face. Nothing expensive or elaborate. Just small reminders that someone saw her, someone cared. Claire never acknowledged these gifts directly, but Sarah noticed she kept them. The stone stayed on her nightstand. The drawings got pinned to her bulletin board. The candy wrappers were folded neatly in her drawer. One afternoon, while Sarah was changing sheets in Claire's room, she found something tucked under the girl's mattress. It was a notebook, the kind with a lock on it. The lock was broken, hanging loose. Sarah knew she should not look. It was a violation of privacy, but something made her open it. Inside were drawings, dozens of them. They told a story without words. There were pictures of a man and woman yelling, their mouths wide and dark. Pictures of a little girl hiding in a closet. Pictures of broken things, smashed vases, and overturned furniture. And one picture, darker than all the others, that made Sarah's blood run cold. It showed a man's hand raised, about to strike, and a small girl cowering below. Sarah's hands shook as she closed the notebook and put it back exactly where she found it. Her mind raced. Was Richard hitting Claire? Was that why she stopped speaking? Or had she witnessed violence between her parents? The drawings were not clear enough to know for certain, but they screamed of trauma. Sarah understood now why all the expensive doctors had failed. They were looking for a medical problem. They were searching for damage in Claire's brain or throat. But the damage was in her heart, in her sense of safety. You cannot fix that with pills or exercises. That evening, Sarah did something risky. When she brought Claire her dinner tray, she sat down on the edge of the bed. She looked directly into the girl's blue eyes and spoke softly. She told Claire a story about a bird that had forgotten how to sing. The bird lived in a golden cage with everything it needed except freedom. One day, an old crow came to visit. The crow was not pretty or fancy, but it knew the truth. It told the bird that its voice was still there, waiting inside. The bird just needed to feel safe enough to let it out. Sarah asked Claire if she understood. The girl stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly, almost imperceptibly, she nodded. It was the first real acknowledgement, the first genuine response Claire had given anyone in years. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes but blinked them away. She squeezed Claire's hand gently and left the room. That night, Sarah could not sleep. She knew what she had to do, but it was dangerous. If she was wrong, she would lose her job and probably never find another one in this city. The Hartwells had connections everywhere. One bad word from them could ruin her, but if she was right and she did nothing, Claire might never speak again. The girl might grow up broken, trapped in silence, carrying secrets that would poison her entire life. Sarah prayed that night for the first time in years, asking for wisdom and courage. She asked for the right words to reach a frightened child, and she asked for protection from whatever darkness lived in this mansion, hidden behind marble columns and crystal chandeliers. The Christmas gala was 3 days away. After that, Sarah decided she would find a way to make Claire speak. She would create a moment safe enough, private enough for the child to finally tell her truth. Whatever that truth was, Sarah would listen. And then she would decide what to do with it. Consequences be damned. The night of the Christmas gala arrived with perfect timing. Fresh snow covered the grounds and the mansion glowed with thousands of tiny lights. Luxury cars lined the circular driveway, dropping off guests in fur coats and diamond jewelry. A string quartet played in the main hall, and waiters moved through the crowd with champagne and appetizers that cost more than Sarah made in a week. Margaret looked stunning in a red gown that probably cost as much as a car. Richard stood beside her, playing the role of devoted husband and successful businessman. They smiled and laughed with their guests, and nobody would have guessed that their marriage was held together with nothing but money and pride. Claire was supposed to make a brief appearance, freshly dressed and presented like a doll for the guests to see. But when Sarah went to get her ready, she found the child hiding in her closet, knees pulled to her chest, shaking. Sarah knelt down outside the closet door. She did not try to pull Claire out. She just sat there and began talking in her gentle voice. She told Claire that she understood being scared of crowds. She talked about her own childhood, growing up in a small house with 7 siblings, how overwhelming family gatherings could be. After a while, Claire's shaking slowed. Sarah suggested they make a deal. Claire would go downstairs for just 5 minutes, smile at a few people, and then Sarah would bring her right back up. Claire could even hold Sarah's hand the whole time if she wanted. Claire emerged from the closet slowly. Her eyes asked a question Sarah understood without words. Yes, Sarah promised she would stay right beside her. They got Claire dressed in a white velvet dress that made her look like an angel. Sarah combed her golden curls and helped her with her shoes. Downstairs, Margaret grabbed Claire's hand a bit too tightly and pulled her into the crowd. Sarah was forced to step back, watching from the edges as mothers do. She saw the fake smiles of the guests as they looked at the silent child. She heard their whispered comments. Such a shame. Such a beautiful girl. What a tragedy. Claire's eyes found Sarah across the room, desperate and pleading. Sarah gave her an encouraging nod. 5 minutes, she mouthed. Just 5 minutes. But then something happened that changed everything. A woman approached Claire with her own daughter, a girl about Claire's age with a loud voice and no sense of boundaries. The other girl asked Claire directly why she did not talk. Was she stupid? Was something wrong with her brain? Margaret laughed it off nervously, making excuses. But Claire's face went white. Her eyes grew wide with panic. And before anyone could stop her, she ran. She pushed through the crowd of expensive dresses and pressed suits heading for the stairs. Sarah followed immediately, ignoring Mrs. Chen's angry glare. She found Claire in her bathroom, locked inside, crying so hard she could barely breathe. Sarah knocked gently and spoke through the door. She told Claire to open up, that she was safe now, that nobody would hurt her. It took 10 minutes, but finally the lock clicked. Claire threw herself at Sarah, wrapping her small arms around the maid's waist and sobbing into her uniform. Sarah held her tight, stroking her hair and humming that old gospel song. When the crying finally stopped, Sarah carried Claire to her bed. She sat beside her, still holding her hand. The sounds of the party drifted up from below, muffled and distant. In the quiet of the bedroom, Sarah decided it was time. She spoke softly, carefully, choosing each word. She told Claire that she knew something bad had happened. She said that sometimes bad things make us want to hide, to stay quiet, to make ourselves disappear. But staying silent does not make the bad things go away. It just lets them grow bigger in the darkness. Claire's eyes filled with fresh tears. She shook her head back and forth, as if saying no to something only she could see. Sarah squeezed her hand. Sarah told her about secrets, how some secrets protect us and some secrets hurt us. She said that secrets about bad things, about people hurting us or scaring us, those secrets are too heavy for children to carry alone. Those secrets need to be shared with someone safe. someone who will listen and believe and help. She looked directly into Claire's eyes and whispered the most important words. She told Claire that whatever she had seen, whatever had happened, it was not her fault. Nothing was her fault. And if she wanted to tell Sarah about it, Sarah would keep her safe. She promised. The room fell completely silent except for the distant party music. Claire stared at Sarah for what felt like forever. Tears ran down her face, but she did not look away. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. She was fighting with herself, Sarah could see it. 4 years of silence against 1 moment of trust. Sarah did not push. She just waited, patient as stone, giving Claire all the time she needed. And then finally Claire's lips moved. A sound came out rough and broken from years of disuse. 1 word, barely more than a breath. The word was simple but powerful. It was the word that would crack open everything that had been locked away for so long. Claire's small voice, rusty and uncertain, spoke into the quiet room. She said the word that had been trapped inside her for 4 years. She said it again, louder this time, and Sarah felt her heart break and heal at the same moment. Claire was speaking. After all this time, after all the doctors and treatments and money thrown at the problem, it was a simple moment of safety and trust that unlocked her voice. But what Claire said next made Sarah's blood run cold. It was not what she expected. It was worse. The secret Claire had been carrying was darker and more complicated than Sarah had imagined. And now that it was out, floating in the air between them, Sarah knew that everything was about to change. Claire's small voice continued, stumbling over words she had not used in years. She told Sarah what she had seen that night 4 years ago. She described sounds and images that no child should ever witness. Her words came faster now, spilling out like water from a broken dam, and Sarah held her through it all, absorbing the terrible truth. When Claire finally finished speaking, she was exhausted. Her voice had given out again, reduced to whispers. But she had done it. She had spoken. She had told her secret to someone who listened without judgment or disbelief. Sarah sat in shock, her mind racing. What Claire had told her was serious. It involved powerful people doing terrible things. It explained everything about why the girl had stopped speaking, why she was so afraid, why she flinched around her own father. Sarah now faced an impossible choice. She could pretend she heard nothing, finish her work contract, and walk away with her paycheck. Or she could take what Claire told her and do something about it, knowing it would probably destroy her own life in the process. Downstairs, the party continued. Laughter and music filled the mansion. Nobody knew that in a bedroom on the 2nd floor, a child had finally found her voice, and with it, she had revealed a truth that would shake the foundation of the Hartwell empire. Sarah looked at Claire, now sleeping fitfully, her face still wet with tears. She thought about her own children, her grandchildren, all the children in the world who depended on adults to protect them when they could not protect themselves. She knew what she had to do. It would not be easy. It would probably cost her everything. But some things were more important than money or safety or comfort. Some things required courage, the kind that came from deep inside, the kind that mothers and grandmothers carried in their bones. Sarah stood up slowly, her knees aching from sitting so long. She took one last look at Claire, then walked to the door. She had a lot to do and not much time to do it. The truth was out now, and truth had a way of demanding justice, no matter how rich or powerful the people involved were. The party below was reaching its peak, everyone drunk on champagne and their own importance. They had no idea that their perfect world was about to come crashing down, all because a black maid had done what dozens of expensive doctors could not do. She had listened. She had believed, and now she would act. Sarah did not sleep that night. After the party ended and the mansion fell quiet, she sat in her small room and thought about what to do next. Claire's words echoed in her mind, each one like a weight pressing down on her chest. What the girl had witnessed was not simple abuse. It was something far more complex and dangerous. 4 years ago, when Claire was only 3, she had woken up one night and wandered downstairs looking for water. What she saw in her father's study changed her life forever. Richard had been meeting with 2 other men. Claire described them as scary, with mean faces and loud voices. They were arguing about money, lots of money. She heard words she did not understand then, but remembered clearly now. Words like offshore accounts, blackmail, and fraud. She saw her father hand over a briefcase full of cash. She heard threats about what would happen if anyone found out. But the worst part, the thing that made Claire stop speaking, was what happened when one of the men noticed her standing in the doorway. Richard had turned and seen his daughter watching. His face changed, became cold and hard. He told the men to leave, then grabbed Claire by the arm hard enough to bruise. He had not hit her, but he had done something worse. He had leaned down close to her face and told her in a voice she had never heard before that if she ever told anyone what she saw, something very bad would happen to her mother. He said people who talked about things they should not see sometimes lost the people they loved. For a 3-year-old child, the message was clear and terrifying. Speaking meant danger, silence meant safety. So Claire had locked her voice away deep inside where no one could find it, where it could not accidentally reveal the secret that might hurt her mother. Sarah understood now why the doctors had failed. Claire's silence was not a medical condition. It was survival. It was a small child's way of protecting herself and the people she loved from a threat she did not fully understand but knew was real. The question now was what to do with this information. Sarah had no proof. It was just the word of a 7-year-old girl who had not spoken in 4 years, describing something she saw when she was 3. No lawyer would take this seriously. No judge would act on it. The Hartwells had money and power. Sarah was just a maid, but Sarah also knew that financial crimes left trails. If what Claire described was true, there would be evidence somewhere. Bank records, documents, witnesses. The problem was finding someone who would look for it, someone who could not be bought or scared off. When morning came, Sarah made breakfast for the family as usual. She watched Richard read his newspaper, looking every bit the respectable businessman. She saw Margaret planning her day of shopping and spa appointments. They both seemed completely unaware that their daughter had finally broken her silence. Claire came down for breakfast looking exhausted but different somehow. There was a lightness in her eyes that had not been there before. When Sarah brought her orange juice, Claire looked up and mouthed 2 words that only Sarah could see. "Thank you." Sarah spent that day thinking and planning. She could not go to the police without proof. She could not confront the Hartwells without putting Claire in danger. She needed to be smart about this, careful. She needed help from someone she could trust. That afternoon, during her break, Sarah made a phone call. She called her nephew, Marcus, who worked as an investigative reporter for a major newspaper. She had not spoken to him in over a year, not since his mother's funeral. But Marcus was good at his job. He was the kind of reporter who did not back down from powerful people. She told him she had information about Richard Hartwell, but could not say more over the phone. Marcus was immediately interested. The Hartwell name carried weight, and any story involving them would be big news. They agreed to meet the next day at a coffee shop far from the mansion. That night, Sarah sat with Claire in her room after dinner. She explained in simple terms that a child could understand what she was going to do. She told Claire that some very smart people would need to investigate her father to see if he had really done bad things. It might take time and it might be scary, but Sarah would be there every step of the way. Claire listened carefully. Then she reached under her bed and pulled out her locked notebook, the one Sarah had seen before. She handed it to Sarah. Inside were not just drawings but also dates written in a child's handwriting. Claire had been marking time, noting when her father had late-night meetings, when strange men came to the house, when she heard angry voices through closed doors. This child had been keeping her own investigation, documenting everything she could even though she could not speak about it. Sarah felt a surge of pride and heartbreak. Claire had been so brave, so smart, trapped in silence but still trying to hold on to the truth. Sarah met with Marcus the next day. They sat in a back corner of a crowded coffee shop, and Sarah told him everything, showing him Claire's notebook. Marcus listened without interrupting, his journalist instincts on full alert. When Sarah finished, he sat back and let out a long breath. He told her this was big, potentially huge. If Richard Hartwell was involved in money laundering or fraud, it could bring down his entire empire. But it was also dangerous. Men like Hartwell did not get to where they were by being careless. They had lawyers, connections, and resources to protect themselves. Marcus said he would start digging quietly, looking into Hartwell's business dealings without raising suspicion. He had contacts at the FBI and the Financial Crimes Division. If there was something to find, he would find it. But Sarah needed to be prepared for what might happen when the truth came out. Sarah understood. She knew that once this started, there would be no going back. The Hartwells would know someone had talked. They would suspect the staff. Sarah would likely lose her job and her reputation. She might face legal threats or worse. But she also knew that staying silent would mean Claire had spoken her truth for nothing. It would mean teaching the girl that power always wins, that bad people never face consequences, that speaking up was pointless. Sarah could not live with that message. Over the next 2 weeks, Marcus worked his investigation while Sarah continued her routine at the mansion. She stayed close to Claire, who was slowly starting to use her voice more. The girl whispered to Sarah when they were alone, practicing speaking again after so many years of silence. Margaret and Richard noticed something different about their daughter, but could not pinpoint what it was. She seemed less withdrawn, more present somehow. They attributed it to the new maid, pleased that they had finally found someone who seemed to help Claire without costing them a fortune. They had no idea that the maid was quietly gathering information, photographing documents she found while cleaning Richard's study, noting names and dates from papers left carelessly on his desk. Sarah knew she was taking enormous risks, but she had come too far to stop now. Marcus called her with updates. He had found irregularities in Hartwell's company finances, shell corporations in the Cayman Islands, suspicious cash transfers, business partners with criminal records. It was all circumstantial so far, but it was building into something bigger. He needed more time to connect all the pieces, but time was something Sarah did not have much of. Mrs. Chen was watching her more closely now, suspicious of the time Sarah spent with Claire, and Richard seemed tense, on edge, as if he sensed something was wrong. He had started having more private phone conversations, closing doors and speaking in low voices. One evening, Sarah overheard him talking to someone on the phone in his study. She was cleaning the hallway outside and heard fragments of the conversation through the door. He was angry, worried about an audit, telling someone to make documents disappear to ensure certain people stayed quiet. Sarah's heart raced. Something was happening. The pressure was building. She needed to move faster, but she also needed to keep Claire safe. The girl was her first priority above everything else. That night, Sarah made a decision. She would give Marcus everything she had gathered, all of Claire's notes, all the photos, all the information. She would ask him to publish the story soon, before Richard had time to cover his tracks completely. And then she would prepare for the storm that was coming, because Sarah knew that when the truth finally came out, it would explode like a bomb in the perfect world the Hartwells had built. Lives would be destroyed. Careers would end. And somewhere in the middle of it all would be a small girl who had finally found her voice, and the woman who had helped her use it. Sarah packed a small bag that night with essentials, things she might need if she had to leave quickly. She tucked away money she had saved, important documents, phone numbers. She was preparing for war, the kind fought not with weapons but with truth, and she knew that even truth needed soldiers willing to defend it. Everything came crashing down on a Tuesday morning in January. Sarah woke to her phone buzzing with a message from Marcus. The story was going live in 2 hours. He had coordinated with federal investigators who were already preparing warrants for Richard Hartwell's arrest. The evidence Marcus had gathered, combined with Claire's testimony recorded by child psychologists, was enough to move forward. Sarah got dressed quickly, her hands shaking as she buttoned her uniform. She knew what today would bring: chaos, anger, accusations, and probably the end of her job. But she also knew it was necessary. Some things were bigger than any one person's comfort or security. The mansion was quiet when she went downstairs. Richard had already left for the office, and Margaret was still sleeping off last night's wine. Sarah went directly to Claire's room. The girl was awake, sitting up in bed with her stuffed rabbit clutched to her chest. Somehow she seemed to know that today was different. Sarah sat down beside her and took her small hand. She explained in simple words that the secret was about to stop being a secret. People would know what Claire had seen. Her father would have to answer questions about the bad things he had done. It might be scary and confusing, but Sarah would stay right beside her through all of it. Claire's eyes widened with fear, but then she did something remarkable. She spoke, her voice still soft and uncertain from years of disuse, but clear enough. She said she was ready. She said she wanted people to know the truth because keeping secrets had made her sick inside for too long. Sarah hugged her tight, this brave little girl who had survived so much. They sat together quietly, waiting for the storm they both knew was coming. The storm arrived at 9 in the morning. Federal agents came to the mansion with search warrants. They were polite but firm, asking for Richard Hartwell's location and beginning to collect documents from his study. Margaret came downstairs in her robe, screaming at them, demanding to know what was happening. Mrs. Chen found Sarah with Claire, and her face went hard with understanding. She knew immediately who had betrayed the family. Before she could say anything, one of the agents asked to speak with Sarah privately. He explained that she would need to give a statement, and that Claire would be interviewed by specialists trained to work with children. The news broke online first, then spread to television and newspapers. Billionaire Richard Hartwell was being investigated for fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. The story detailed years of financial crimes, shell companies, and illegal dealings. And at the center of it all was the testimony of his 7-year-old daughter, the girl who had not spoken for 4 years. Richard was arrested at his office. The images of him being led out in handcuffs were broadcast on every news channel. His lawyers immediately started working, promising to fight the charges, insisting it was all a misunderstanding or a conspiracy against a successful man. Margaret turned her rage on Sarah. She accused her of poisoning Claire against her family, of making up stories, of being a liar trying to destroy them for money. She fired Sarah on the spot and had security escort her from the mansion. Sarah went quietly, but not before making eye contact with Claire one last time through the window of the girls' room. The weeks that followed were brutal for everyone. The media camped outside the mansion. Other business associates of Richard's started getting investigated. More evidence emerged, more witnesses came forward. The empire Richard had built began to crumble piece by piece. Sarah moved back to her small apartment, now unemployed and facing her own struggles. The Hartwells' lawyers tried to discredit her, painting her as a disgruntled employee with an agenda. The society women who had once ignored her now attacked her in the press. She received threatening phone calls and hate mail from people who believed powerful men should never be questioned. But Sarah also received something else. Letters from other domestic workers thanking her for her courage. Calls from advocacy groups offering support, and visits from Marcus, who kept her updated on the case and made sure she knew she had not fought alone. Claire was removed from the mansion temporarily and placed with Margaret's sister while the investigation continued. Child Protective Services got involved, ensuring the girl was safe and receiving proper therapy. Slowly, carefully, Claire began to heal. She started speaking more regularly, attending a special school where teachers understood her trauma. The trial took almost a year. Sarah testified about what Claire had told her and what she had observed in the mansion. Claire gave her testimony via video with a therapist present. Expert witnesses explained the financial crimes in detail that made the jury's eyes glaze over but their faces grow stern with understanding. In the end, Richard Hartwell was found guilty on multiple charges. He was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison and ordered to pay back millions in stolen funds. His business empire was dissolved. Many of his associates faced their own charges. Margaret divorced him before the sentencing, desperate to save what remained of her reputation and money. She moved to Europe, taking Claire with her. She never spoke to Sarah again, but she did allow Claire to write letters to the maid who had saved her. Sarah found a new job working at a community center, helping families in need. The pay was less than what she made at the mansion, but the work felt meaningful. She no longer cleaned up after people who treated her as invisible. Instead, she worked alongside people who valued her wisdom and her courage. Claire's letters came every few weeks, filled with drawings and stories written in her improving handwriting. She talked about her new school, her friends, her therapy dog. She was learning to be a child again, to laugh without fear, to speak without worrying that her words would bring disaster. One letter arrived on Sarah's birthday. Inside was a drawing of 2 women holding hands. One was tall and dark, the other small and blonde. Above them, Claire had written in careful letters, "You taught me that my voice matters. Thank you for helping me find it." Sarah pinned that drawing to her refrigerator where she could see it every day. It reminded her why she had risked everything, not for money or recognition, but because a child had needed someone to believe her, to fight for her, to show her that truth was more powerful than fear. The story made national news for months. People debated whether Sarah had done the right thing, whether she had overstepped her boundaries as an employee, whether a child's testimony should carry such weight. Some called her a hero, others called her a troublemaker who had destroyed a family, but Sarah did not pay much attention to any of that. She knew what she knew. She had seen a frightened child trapped in silence, and she had found a way to set her free. Whatever consequences came from that choice, she would live with them. Years later, when Claire was a teenager, she came to visit Sarah. She had grown tall and confident, her voice strong and sure. She was studying psychology, hoping to help other children who had experienced trauma. She thanked Sarah again for listening when no one else would, for believing when belief was dangerous. Sarah hugged her and told her she did not need thanks. She said that any decent person would have done the same thing, though they both knew that was not true. Many people had seen Claire's suffering and done nothing. Many had chosen comfort over courage, silence over justice. But Sarah had chosen differently, and that choice had changed two lives forever. It had freed a child from fear and given an old woman a purpose beyond scrubbing floors and changing sheets. It had proven that sometimes the people with the least power can make the biggest difference, if only they are brave enough to try. The mansion on the hill eventually sold to a new family. The scandal faded from headlines. Richard Hartwell became just another white-collar criminal serving time. Margaret remarried and stopped all contact with her daughter, choosing her new life over her old shame. But Claire and Sarah stayed in touch, their bond forged in whispered secrets and quiet courage. They talked on holidays and birthdays. Sarah went to Claire's high school graduation and cried with pride, and when Claire gave her first speech at a conference about childhood trauma, Sarah sat in the front row, remembering the silent little girl who had once been too afraid to speak. The world moved on, as it always does. New scandals replaced old ones, new mansions filled with new secrets. But somewhere in it all, one woman had taught one child that silence is not safety, that speaking truth is worth the cost, and that sometimes the most important thing we can do is simply listen when someone finally finds their voice. And that was a story worth telling, a story worth living, a story that reminded everyone who heard it that courage does not always look like we expect. Sometimes it looks like a black maid in a billionaire's mansion, choosing to risk everything for a child who could not risk anything at all. Sometimes the greatest power in the world is not money or status or influence. Sometimes it is just one person deciding that truth matters more than comfort, that children matter more than careers, and that love can exist between two people who share nothing except a moment when one needed help and the other refused to look away.